Or where we've been having trouble with the audio broadcasting properly. So we've been trying to figure out why.
I think we figured it out.
Okay, whenever you guys are ready.
Okay, what time is it? Okay, it is 6:03. I will call this Area Board of Zoning Appeals meeting to order. Can we get a roll call, members, please?
Yes, Andy Bailey is absent. Grant Mueller,
Here.
Stacy Pettigo,
Here.
Scott Hessensberger,
Here.
Chester Bankus,
Here.
and then staff members Liz Stitzel and Kat Bell, as well as Attorney Jay Moore are present as well.
Okay, moving on to the minutes for our last meeting. Did you guys all get a chance to look over them? Anything you'd like to add or make changes?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll second that. Roll call vote when you get a chance, please.
Grant Mueller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hessensberger,
Yes.
Chester Bankus.
Yes.
All right, minutes are approved, 4-0.
Okay, moving on to some old business we have this evening, which is application CC-2026-00055, docket number 04-26-SE. Can you take us through that, please?
Yes, so this is the application, it's actually two applications that are here and under old business, one for a special exception and one for a variance, regards vertical bridge, and on behalf of Verizon and a tower. So we had had this hearing last month. It was continued with some requests for the applicants to get some additional information. They've been working on that, but they don't have a clear answer from the commissioners yet as far as road concerns. So they submitted a letter asking if the BZA would grant them an additional continuance to the April 28th BZA hearing. Kat did try to call everybody who could. I think there was one neighbor she couldn't get a phone call to go through on the number they left. But she tried to inform everybody so they wouldn't all come tonight. Staff has no objection to the continuance. We would rather make sure that all the information the BZA needs is here than just discuss something we still have no info on.
Nope, I would agree. Any board discussion?
I'd be glad to make a motion for continuance. I'd like to make a motion for continuance for application CC-2026-00055 and CC-2026-00056, which is the special exception and the variance request.
I'll
for
second.
vertical bridge.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. I will second that. Roll call vote, please, when you get a chance.
Graham Mueller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hessensberger,
Yes.
and Chester Bankus.
Yes.
Okay, so both of those are continued. So if there's anybody in the audience for that, it will be up for discussion at the April 28th meeting. If you are in the audience for that and you didn't get a phone call from Kat, please make sure she has your proper phone number, because if something changes, we'll save you the trip in. So that's all I got on that.
Okay, move on to our public hearings of the evening. We'll start with our first one, which is application number CC-2026-00076, docket number 0626SE. Can you take us through that when you get a chance, please?
I can. So just so that you are aware as a board, these first three cases are all the same site, but we have done separate staff reports because they're separate issues, and they didn't seem like they were going to combine real well. So
That's yours.
this is the application of Steve and Deborah Mulligan. It's a request, this first one is a request for a residence in the agricultural zoning district. Both the property in question and everything surrounding it are zoned agriculturally. The proposed site will consist of an approximately 10-acre lot on the west side of North 900 West between State Road 26 and 1000 North in Section 19 of Ross Township. It'll be the second split from a 257.49-acre parent tract. The first split was in 2015 for a confined feeding operation on the northern side of the parent tract, north of the petition site. The petition site is farm ground that's currently still being farmed, and the petitioner, Deborah Mulligan, is the deeded owner of the entire parcel. The petitioners would like to subdivide about 10 acres in order to build a single-family dwelling to reside in and also have enough area for their horse on the new lot. Just by way of awareness, future applications we'll get to as we move through the meeting, they will also be requesting a special exception for an accessory apartment and an accessory structure, which can only be considered if they first have approval for a residence. And then for a variance from the quarter-mile setback required for a house from a confined feeding operation. So those we'll discuss separately, but just so you have the big picture. The petitioners anticipate being no closer than 695 foot from the confined feeding with either residential use. The existing farm ground they're wanting to split their lot from is farmed by family and will continue to be, and the confined feeding operation is also overseen by family. There is an existing standalone lot with a dwelling that, according to county tax records, was built in 1830 that is not in common ownership with or part of the petition site, but is adjacent. The petition site is also about a quarter-mile west of the unincorporated town of Edna Mills. Staff did run a point system, but it was not able to score enough points for administrative approval, which is not surprising given the 10-acre size request. Usually the point system penalizes things that are bigger than 2 acres and smaller than 20 because of the concern to limit how much cropland gets pulled out of production for housing per house. So there's 2 maps on the second page. The top one just kind of shows you the zoning and notes the location of the confined feeding and the new lot. And then the second one is kind of a rough site plan of what they're thinking. In terms of request analysis, there's 4 criteria in the Unified Development Ordinance in section 513.03 that the board must affirmatively find are met. First, that the lot shall be located such that the proximity to other dwellings, the configuration of the parent tract, or the location of creeks, ditches, and other natural features have the least negative impact on the use of agricultural equipment or the use of the property as part of the farm. This site is still being farmed as cropland, other than that standalone lot with the older dwelling on it and the confined feeding operation. If the application is approved, the petitioners will then need to go to the Area Plan Commission for a minor subdivision of at most 10 acres that will leave about 57 acres as cropland to continue to be farmed by the petitioner's family. If approved, the petitioners will also have to seek a variance approval if they wish to put their house in the location they desire, since it will not meet the required setback of 1,320 feet from the confined feeding operation to the north that is family operated. However, staff will note they can choose another location on the parcel that would not require obtaining the variance, and would not create any further difficulty to the confined feeding for expansion. But that existing dwelling that's there does already impose some difficulty for expansion because it's right at, the confined feeding built pretty much right at the minimum setback between a house and a CAFO. The petitioners did note that the family member who farms the cropland requested that the proposed new lot not be placed up against the confined feeding southern property line in order to give them enough space for equipment access from North County Road 900 West to the farm ground. So that's why they haven't placed their 2 sites side by side, as we normally would kind of expect family to do. And then the reason they want the larger lot is they want enough room for their horse to be able to have grazing with their house. And they don't want to have their horse right up against State Road 26 where there's more traffic. The second item is locating a dwelling on the new lot would not require changes in road surfaces or bridges. The site is off a paved road that appears to be kept maintained and serves farm equipment that accesses several farm sites in the vicinity. The confined feeding to the north, as well as a few other homes. Does not appear that a new dwelling in the area will significantly affect traffic flow or volume. 3, locating a new dwelling on the new lot would not interfere with current agricultural practices in the adjacent area, nor substantially restrict the expansion of confined feeding and other agricultural practices. The proposed new, at most 10-acre lot will be directly off 900 West. The remaining exempt division of 57 acres will continue to be farmed. The confined feeding does still have room to expand to the west without the new dwelling on this proposed lot affecting it. If they wanted to expand to the south because they placed themselves at the minimum setback, they would already be limited in that expansion because of the existing house that sits there. So that would require the confined feeding to seek a variance in order to expand south, whether or not this house is placed on this property as well. Furthermore, the confined feeding is overseen by family of the petitioners. 4, there are mitigating circumstances in the application of the above rating criteria. Again, the primary circumstance is that the petitioners who own the property and are involved in the farming operation and the ownership of it want to live in the proposed new dwelling and have animals. So the balance of the land that they own there in that area, even though not part of the subdivision, will continue to be farmed. The confined feeding operation will continue to operate. This dwelling is being proposed in an area that already creates some maneuvering for farm equipment. because of the existing dwelling and the confined feeding operations location. So as long as the new lot is either adjacent to one or the other, it's not anticipated it's going to create more difficulty than already exists in terms of number of turns for equipment. In addition to those standards, there's the overall 6 special exception standards in section 203.11A that apply to all special exception requests. First, the proposed use conforms to the district provisions in which it will be located and the general regulations of the ordinance. If the special exception is granted, a single-family home will be permitted on the parcel. If no variance is granted, there is still room for the house at the furthest southern end of the lot outside of the 1320 setback. But in order to set the house where the petitioners show on the site plan, they must have a variance, which, as noted, will be a future hearing you'll consider. If approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals, minor subdivision approval will be needed from the Area Plan Commission. 2, the proposed use shall not involve an element or cause a condition that may be dangerous, injurious, or noxious to other property or people, and shall comply with the performance standards herein. So for houses, that usually centers around a conversation about septic and making sure that waste is dealt with appropriately. Nash Smith with the Clinton County Health Department reported that they have received a soil sample test result, and they have determined the proposed position site is suitable to support a septic system, so there's no concerns there. 3, the proposed use shall be sited, oriented, and landscaped so the relationship of its buildings and grounds to adjacent buildings and properties do not impair health, safety, or comfort, nor adversely affect values of adjacent properties. The petition site's being split from farm ground that will continue to be cropped by the family of petitioners to staff's knowledge. The petitioners intend to build a dwelling near another rural dwelling that's been there since 1830, but both dwellings should still have a little space between them. But as our ordinance and our comprehensive plan would state, they'll be clustered together to minimize the effects on agricultural practice around them. 4, the proposed use shall produce a total environmental effect consistent with and not harmful to the environment of the neighborhood. Again, we've got 67 acres of farm ground here, and this will be at most a 10-acre split for the new single-family dwelling and the horse. There are a few other existing homes in the area that are spaced out. It would seem another rural home would be consistent with the area. 5, the proposed use shall organize vehicular access and parking to minimize traffic movement on adjacent streets. There's no concern here in terms of 10 acres having enough room for 2 parking spots. And finally, the proposed use shall promote the objectives of the ordinance and shall be consistent with the comprehensive plan. Objective 2, Policy 1 of the 2012 Comprehensive Plan states to minimize development on agricultural land. The Ross Township Future Land Use Plan, on page 70 of the Comprehensive Plan, designates this area of the township as primarily agricultural. Although the proposed new lot is part of the farm ground around it, at most 10 acres will no longer be tillable, but it will be used for pasture and grazing and an agriculture-like use, just with livestock instead of cropland. And there's still farming practices, including the cropping of this land and the confined feeding to the north, conducted by family, that will continue without interruption. The petitioner would need more than a 1 or 2 acre residential lot in order to have horses. Staff would also note that the residential zoning district that surrounds Edna Mills is only a 1/4 mile away to the east, and there are 6 other homes already within a 1/4 mile of this proposed new lot. So this is probably not an area where we're going to see additional confined feeding operations be able to locate, irregardless of adding an additional house. It's not going to make a difference on that. The comprehensive plan for Ross Township states the township will likely continue to experience development pressure because of its proximity to Lafayette and State Road 26, which extends across it. But the point system and BZAs should be used within the agricultural areas to identify on a case-by-case basis where it's appropriate to add houses while minimizing conflict with agricultural practices. As a result, staff would recommend to approve the request for one home with the following conditions. First, that the new home lot may be no more than 10 acres. And if there was flexibility with the petitioner, I would limit that to whatever their max is for the horse. 2, that the new home lot must be contiguous to the existing house lot at 9178 North County Road 900 West in such a way that there's no increase in maneuvering for farm equipment in the field. So it needs to remain a single rectangle to farm around. And 3, unless a variance is obtained, any residence built on the lot must remain a 1/4 mile from the confined feeding to the north. And of course, as always, with the note that if this is approved, minor subdivision approval will be necessary from the Area Plan Commission.
Okay, thank you. Is petitioner present? Would you like to add anything, sir? If you do, can you come to the mic and state your name, please? Since we're recording. Thank you.
Steve Mulligan. Yeah, we're the petitioners on this. And when we worked with Katrina Bell, we were talking about the distance. You know, she put like 695, and that's not in stone. It probably is going to be further, but it's the closest it could possibly be with the extra building, like a shop. We're going to build an apartment. Our granddaughter's has medical conditions and some learning disabilities, but so she'll probably in some form in her future be living somewhere with us.
Okay.
Trying to get her to the level where she can be on her own someday possibly. Yeah, and we can't have a horse. We're paying for storage right now, you know, it'd be nice to have it on our place. So our plan would be to build her an apartment, build a shop, apartment, so she could have her own space and take care of the duties with the farm, you know, with her horse. So, and we want to live on the land that we now own, which is just a half mile from where we're at now. But
Yeah.
and we want to go to the county road because 26 is so busy. And originally Katrina I drew it parallel with the 900 West. So I said, well, that's not going to work because my brother-in-law that's here couldn't get his machinery in the field off 26. So that's why we cut it short in kind of a block shape around that old home and not disrupt any more of the farm ground, because each acre we're taking off is taking more money out of our pocket, cash rent. So we hopefully we'll get this passed so we can move forward with this. You guys, any other questions with me? And we're aware of all the drainage stuff too, in all the houses that we've lived at. My brother-in-law attests that there's, the laterals are 40 foot apart, and then there's a main that's gonna be probably on that property that, and he said he dug down 7 foot and didn't get to the bottom of it. So we got plenty of drainage to that for the septic and downspouts and all the other stuff that goes with building a home. So, but yeah, we don't want water damage or water problems. We've had that in the country over our lifetime. So that's enough, until you have that problem, that becomes your number one issue that you want to tackle when you're, you know, going to be at another place. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to add anything? Okay, turn it over to board discussion. I guess I'll start. I think it's pretty straightforward. As long as they meet the recommendations or the conditions that Liz and Kat put forth, I think it's pretty good.
I would agree. I'm ready to make a motion to.
I would say unless,
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to approve, application number CC-2026-00076, docket number 06-26-SE, which is a special exception with the conditions, which were incorporated in the motion by reference with conditions that are listed in the staff report.
Did you mean with the finding?
With the
At
findings,
beginning of that?
with the findings of staff report, with the conditions that are enumerated in the staff report included, yes.
I'll second that. Roll call vote when you're done, please.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hesmonsberger,
Yes.
Chester Bankus.
Yes.
Okay. So with regards at least to the house, you'll be good to move on to your subdivision process, and then we'll get through these other two hearings here, and you'll know the rest of it.
Okay, moving on to our next public hearing of the evening, which is application CC-2026-00077, docket number 07-26-SE. Can you take us through that, please?
I can, so I'm gonna save us a little time on these next two because the location and situation are all the same. So I'm gonna skip directly to the third page of the staff report, and in this case, This is also a special exception. This is a request for an accessory apartment in an accessory structure. There are, again, 5 criteria that we need to consider as we look at whether or not to approve this. First, the proposed use conforms to the district provisions in which it will be located and all the general regulations of the ordinance. So accessory apartments do have additional requirements in the ordinance. There's a series of standards. I'm just going to kind of bounce through them really quick. There can't be more than 1 on a property. The standard's met. Right now, there's no structures on the parcel, and as far as their plans, there'll be 1 primary house and 1 accessory apartment. 2, the apartment has to be clearly secondary and incidental to the principal dwelling and compatible in appearance. So this accessory apartment will be in a new pole barn that will have some general personal storage as well as an apartment area. It's only going to be a 1-bedroom. The new dwelling itself is proposed to have 3 bedrooms and be larger, so the standard would appear to be met. 3, the accessory apartment can either be detached or attached. In this case, it's detached, and it does meet the ordinance in that it is not a mobile or manufactured home or a temporary structure. 4, the owner has to live in either the apartment or the house. In this case, they intend to reside in the primary dwelling. But they did note that in the future, if one of their children moves into the primary dwelling and they downsize, they might move into the apartment. But they do understand if they're not living in one or the other, then the approval would no longer be valid. 5, there can be no exterior stairways. There's none. This is just a single-story structure. 6 is also not applicable as it applies to when an apartment is in the primary structure, which this is not. The next one is that all applicable building codes and health department standards have to be met. So there's no reason to assume this won't be able to meet building code. The applicant does plan on going through the proper process for subdivisions and permits. Nash Smith with the health department noted that he has received soil test samples, and there's suitable soils here for the septics that are required for the accessory apartment as well. And finally, if additional parking is needed, it has to be off-site, and it has to be a safe arrangement. So with 10 acres at most, the site has plenty of space for both the 2 required parking spaces for the dwelling as well as the 2 required for the accessory apartment. The second finding we have to examine is the proposed use shall not involve an element or cause a condition that may be dangerous, injurious, or noxious to other property or persons, and shall comply with the performance standards herein. So if the application is approved, then the petitioners will be allowed to build out an accessory apartment in that accessory structure. Since it will be inside the accessory structure, it shouldn't create anything injurious to neighboring properties or people. C, the proposed use shall be sited, oriented, and landscaped so the relationship of its buildings and grounds to adjacent buildings and properties do not impair health, safety, or comfort, nor adversely affect values of adjacent properties. So again, this will be located within an accessory structure in the middle of a 10-acre site, and it will have a pole barn style, which for an agricultural site is very compatible. Typically, you see a house and then you see outbuildings that are pole barn style. So it should mesh well with the area. It will sit further off the road than the actual dwelling will, according to the site plan. So for passing traffic on 900 or down on 26, you might be able to see it is just going to look like an outbuilding. The finding would appear to be met. D, the proposed use shall produce a total environmental effect consistent with and not harmful to the environment of the neighborhood. Again, this is surrounded by and part of farmed cropland, and this will be in a new pole barn that will house both the accessory apartment and some personal storage. New pole barn will be consistent with what we typically see in agricultural areas. E, the proposed use shall organize vehicular access and parking to minimize conflicting traffic movement on adjacent streets. So as stated under the specific standards for accessory apartments, there's plenty of room here for the 4 required parking spaces. The finding would appear to be met. Finally, F, the proposed use shall promote the objectives of the ordinance and be consistent with the comprehensive plan. The 2012 Comprehensive Plan Land Use Goal 2 says to promote the development of residential areas with high-quality housing in a variety of types, styles, and densities. The use of accessory apartments subject to board approval supports this goal. It also provides an additional housing unit without removing further farm ground from production. So it's also consistent with the comprehensive plan's goal of minimizing housing's effect on agriculture as much as possible, because you get 2 units on a property that's a building lot instead of only 1. Consequently, staff recommends the approval of the special exception request for the accessory apartment and the accessory structure.
Okay, thank you. Does petitioner have anything to add, anything different, sir?
No, not really.
Okay.
Other than, how we're gonna do it, I don't know. But typically, we were just gonna use one end of the pole barn where we put bathrooms,
Sorry, for
No, you're
anybody who
fine.
happens to be listening online, the petitioner noted that they just detailed their plans for the actual build-out, and they said that they intend to put a bathroom and a one-room, kind of studio-style apartment in one end of the pole barn, and then have a kitchen living area that's kind of in the common space along with their storage for family use.
Mhm. Okay. Anybody else in the audience have anything to add? Any questions? Okay, turn it over to board discussion.
I
Don't
think
s-
it's great that
Yeah, I
they're
was-
saving farmland and then putting two structures in one lot and using it wisely. So I'm ready to make a motion to approve it.
Go ahead, sir.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to approve application number CC 2026-00077, docket number 07-26-SE, according to the findings of the staff report, which were incorporated in the motion by reference. And, let's see, do we have conditions? We don't have any conditions on this one, right?
Would you not?
Okay, so that
Okay.
takes care of it then.
Okay, I'll second. Roll call vote when you get a chance, please.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
J.C. Pettico,
Yes.
Scott Hetzensberger,
Yes.
Chester Bennett,
Yes,
4-0.
Okay, we'll move on to the last application for this individual, which is application number CC 2026-00078, docket number 08-26 VA. Can you please take us through the staff report?
Sure can. And again, I'm gonna skip that same site, so I'm gonna skip all the intro info. I will note for people in the audience, we've been discussing special exceptions, which is a use that may or may not be appropriate on a specific site, depending on the details. This is now a variance, which is permission to disobey the rules. So basically a standard in the ordinance that somebody's not able to meet for some reason, and they're asking permission to get an exception from in their particular location. So in this particular case, the Mulligans are requesting sorry, I have my folders backwards. The Mulligans are requesting a variance from the requirement that confined feeding operations and houses be at least a quarter mile apart from each other, which we have here in Clinton County. And they had requested on their application that they be at 695 foot, although they, as he noted, as they've been doing some measuring, they think they're gonna be a little further than that. Well, not noted specifically in the staff report. Staff would note that if the variance is granted, I'd recommend specifying whatever number they think they're gonna be at and not granting that variance any more so than it needs to be granted. So if they think they're gonna be closer to maybe 750 or something, then maybe that number should be moved a little. At any rate, there's 3 findings that go with a variance in order to grant it. First, the approval will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. If this application is approved, the petitioner would be permitted to build a residential use no less than 695 foot from the CAFO to the north. There is already an existing family dwelling to the south of the confined feeding operation. It's 1,400 foot roughly, so just a little beyond the required 1,320. The confined feeding operation is owned and operated within the family of the petitioner. Nash Smith has already reported that they have soil tests and the site is suitable for a septic system. So given that we have an approval from the health department and there is already another existing dwelling in the immediate vicinity, there's no reason to think that granting a variance would create anything injurious. 2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. So the proposed use will be directly off 900 West, and the remaining 57 acres of farm ground will continue to be farmed. The confined feeding still has room to expand to the west without either the existing dwelling or the new dwelling affecting it. If it were to expand to the south without the new dwelling, it would already need to seek variance from this board. So adding another dwelling, regardless of where it sits, isn't gonna change the requirement of the CAFO to come for a variance if they wanna come south. The confined feeding operation is overseen by family of the petitioners and has been in existence since 2015. So given that everybody's family and the petitioners are aware of the existing operation and moving to the nuisance, it would not seem that there would be an adverse effect. If the application's approved, however, in an effort to protect the confined feeding operation, which is a permitted use in the A1 district versus houses which are a special exception use. Staff would recommend to place a condition with the approval that the petitioners and all future property owners of the site forgo objections to the existing CAFO, since ownership can change over time. Should they make expansions, and that they forgo any right to file complaints against those operations. That should be added to the subdivision covenants when the new lot is platted, so it would run with the land for future owners and would be legally enforceable for the confined feeding operation owner as somebody within a quarter mile. 3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in practical difficulties in the use of the property. So without the requested variance, the petitioners would need to build the dwelling and accessory apartments elsewhere in order to meet the 1320 setback. While they do have land, the petitioners state that their practical difficulty is building closer to 26. It's very, very busy and congested with having a horse right up against it. It's also lower, and they think they'll have more drainage issues, shifting their site further south versus this area that is better drained. Consequently, staff would recommend approval of the variance with the condition that the petitioners and all future property owners of the petition site will forego any objections to the existing confined feeding operation, making expansions or filing complaints or legal action against any of its operations. The restriction shall be included as a permanent covenant or restriction on the land for the new home site when the subdivision plat is created. So if you include that, then staff will track it and make sure when they file their subdivision, that appropriate language that Jay has approved makes that restriction going forward for anyone who happens to live there.
Okay, thank you. Does petitioner have anything else to add?
I would just, being we're having the apartment in the shop, that at this point, we're approved for a septic system on the same property at this point, but I don't know if we'll have to have a small one from that shop, like most people have a bathroom in their shop. If we have to do that, we can. My son's put 2 or 3 in the county, and he's worked with Nash at the health department, so whatever we have to do to make it right, we will do to make it work.
Just for anyone listening online, the petitioner simply noted that he's got the septic approvals in terms of soil from the health department, but it's undetermined right now if he's going to do multiple systems to serve the pole barn and the house separately, or if he's going to combine them on one system. He's working with an installer to determine that. I think that sums up.
Nope, I think that's good. Anybody else have anything to add in the audience? Okay, turn it over to board discussion.
Just a question for Liz. You mentioned that if it's 690, the report says 695 for a minimum, or the closest it could be to the confined feeding operation. But you also said if it's like 750 that you wanted to document that too, and then make that as part of the restrictions.
Yeah, you would add an additional to just say, instead of granting the variance to 695, you're granting it to, and I made up that number,
Okay.
whatever he believes he's actually gonna be at closest, because, the variance won't last forever. If they don't act on it, it will expire in 3 years. But if, say, I know you're not planning on this, but if something happened in the family and he sold it, these approvals are still sitting here.
Right.
So whoever comes in, even if it's not family, could do the same thing he has approval for if the approval's still good. So I think it's important, even though the confined feeding operator isn't present in everybody's family, not to grant, it's a pretty significant variance request. So not to grant that to any greater degree than the applicant actually needs to get his structures in an area that drains okay. So if he thinks he's, closer to 750 or 800, like staff would recommend whatever number he thinks he's actually gonna be at. But obviously he can't go closer than whatever the board grants. He can go further away. So, I'm not saying we should restrict him to where he can't get the site in, just that we not grant more than what's needed.
So,
Can I add to that?
Can you come up to the mic, just so I don't have to repeat you? I'm sorry.
You're not just talking behind my- Anyway, right now, I mean, we did the shortest distance, which we won't go any closer to that. But until we get it laid out and marked off, chances are we're gonna be farther. Because we're trying to lay it out where you got one drive in, one drive out. And the shop would be offset to the north, more than the house would be, to get that drive, one shot in, one shot out. Make it as easy as possible, especially we got a trailer and horse and, maneuvering and all that stuff. So we'll try and get it further than what we're applying for. if we can do it.
Unrelated question, but Jay had just asked, are you putting in a separate barn for the horse, or is the horse gonna be in the pole barn with,
We
Everything else.
believe we're gonna put some kind of a building, a little, they have these little stoops that just gets them out
yeah,
of the
like
way and stuff.
a lean-to?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's our plans at this moment.
And it's no big deal, just wanted to
Because
find
we're
out.
we're gonna be burning money, so yeah, it's all about what it's gonna cost at the beginning, to get it, to work. But, yeah, so we'll try and get it further, but until we get out there and stake it off, I can't give you a definite answer for that.
Right.
It's best I can give you today. It's probably not what you want, but I don't wanna tell something that doesn't happen, so. But we're all family, everybody's family on the property, so. I'd say 99.9% of the time it ever gets sold, it's gonna be our kids and the grandkids. It's gonna stay in the family. That's the way they've always done it with the farm. So.
Plenty of room for a finger system.
And we'll grant those wishes from my wife's parents that have passed now, so.
So the question for Liz then is, you mentioned if you build something and it winds up being 700 feet, instead of 695 feet away from the CFO,
That's
does
not
that
problem.
automatically get recorded, or do we need to make some additional recommendations?
Once it's built,
beyond
it's
what's on
acted
this?
on. Question, are you planning to build within the next year?
We'd like to do this year, but it's all gonna depend on, the surveyor. That's 40 to 60 days, so we're
Yeah.
gonna try and get it started, this year if we could.
So something you could do alternatively that would help hedge any risk that might or might not exist is normally a variance lasts for a year with 2 administrative extensions up to 3 years. We have on occasion, when there's been a situation where we're okay with it how it is, but if something changed, we'd want to talk about it. You could incorporate into your motion that in this case, the variance is only good if the permit is pulled within 1 year. I would tie that to the permit, not house conclusion, because likely by the time they get through subdivision process, they pull the permit, hopefully they have it under roof before winter, but they may not actually be all the way through their CO within the year. But if the permit's pulled, then that's considered to be acting on the variance. So that would at least note that if something happened or there was some delay or something changed, that they would come back to the board to either re-up if the facts haven't changed, then come talk to you personally, or if facts did change, it could be reconsidered and it wouldn't be hanging out there for a long period of time.
Yeah, consider that part of it, but also if we just do a year, I don't know, I can't tell you today whether we'll get it done, with the way everything is and materials and the way what's happening in the world, but we'll get it done as fast as we can, but, yeah.
I think that's why we would tie it into the issuance of the permit, not the completion of the project. And
Or if you want
and
to.
you could come back if something
Yeah,
changed,
what I was gonna say is.
and no
if-
facts have changed.
If you want to write it up where you give the variance and then, once we actually get it laid out, it's gonna be more, we can put it, in stone on, on the distance then too, that is further than what we applied for, so.
Do we need additional wording?
He really doesn't have to come back any further, though.
No, he doesn't, but if the variance, if they were to restrict it to 1 year with no extensions administratively, and he didn't pull his permit within 1 year, then he would need to come
Yeah.
back to re-request the variance if he had a delay. Of course, you could also
agree.
limit it in some other way. You have the right to set a special expiration, so you could put that at 1.5 years if you wanted with no extensions too.
I'm fine the way it is, to tell you the truth. I just
And
want to make
that's
sure that
fine
we
too. Yep.
did what you, okay,
Yeah, I'm fine with it too.
okay. I'm ready to just go the way it is. All right. So, I'd like to make a motion to approve application number CC-2026-00078, docket 0826 VA, according to the findings of the staff report, which were incorporated in the motion by reference with the conditions listed in the staff report that says the variance with conditions petitioners and all future property owners of petitions that will forego any objections to the existing CFO, making expansions or filing complaints or legal action against the neighbor's operations. Restrictions shall be included as permanent covenant restriction on the land for the new home site when the subdivision plat is created.
I'll second that. Roll call vote when you get a chance.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigrew,
Yes.
Scott Hetzensberger,
Yes.
Chester Backus.
Yes.
Okay, 4-0, so you guys is next up, and you can reach out to Kat tomorrow, but you're gonna need to find yourself a surveyor to work with to start getting your plat prepared. Yep, that'll be for the subdivision, and then that'll get filed with our other board, which is the Area Plan Commission, once it's ready to look at.
And sir, you are good to go. You guys are good to go. You don't have to stay around unless you really want to. Thank you.
You won't put us in timeout.
Yep, thank you, guys.
Appreciate you.
So we'll move on to our next application, or, public hearing of the evening, which is application number CC-2026-00082, docket number 09-26-VA. Can you please take us through that staff report?
I can. This is the application of David Virtue at 113 North Plank Street in the town of Rossville. He's requesting a setback variance to allow a detached accessory structure that's replacing a structure he lost to sit 1 foot from the edge of the West Orchard Drive right-of-way instead of the required 15 feet. The property in question and all the surrounding property is zoned R3, which is medium-density residential. The site is, it's actually a small lot. It's 7,526 square foot, which means it's a legal non-conforming lot size in the town of Rossville, which requires lots to be at least 10,000 square foot. The site is on the southwest corner where North Plank Street and North State Road 39 and West Orchard Drive intersect, and West Orchard Drive kind of zigzags around this lot in a really odd way. Like, I suspect when this was platted, the garage was there and that affected the road alignment, if I was guessing. The petitioner wishes to rebuild the garage after he lost his former one by a fire, and that fire had also spread to his dwelling, damaging it. The dwelling wasn't completely destroyed like the garage was, but it did sustain quite a bit of damage, and it's already working through renovations and getting that finished up. Meanwhile, the petitioner looked at other options to rebuild the garage and try to make it more legal to meet that setback, but he couldn't come up with a solution that wouldn't need some kind of setback variance because of his small lot and the way that the house just sits right in the middle of it. He did have a legal survey done on his property because Beacon actually showed the former garage as being partially in the right-of-way. He was able to show that that was incorrect. The survey completed by 40th Parallel showed the lot line was in a different place. That was provided to the county surveyor, and Beacon was corrected. So we now can see the garage is not in the right-of-way, but rather 1 foot inside of the property line. The petitioner did present his proposal to the town council of Rossville, and they gave a favorable recommendation for him to receive a variance to allow him to rebuild his garage back in the same spot up against their right-of-way. On the second page, you can see the zoning map showing the petition site outlined in red, and then an aerial that this is actually the corrected one, but you can see how Orchard Drive does this kind of weird jog, and how this is actually this house's backyard, but because of the alignments, there's really nowhere to go with a garage. On the third page, you've got a site plan showing that concrete pad that's there, and then Kat's taken a picture looking east at the existing concrete pad left from the fire, and you can also see the survey stake showing where the property corner actually is. There's 3 findings we need to look at in order to grant a variance. First, the approval will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. So the proposed new replacement garage will basically be in the same footprint as the previous legal non-conforming one that predated the ordinance. If he places it in this spot in the same footprint, it will meet the other required setbacks from the house. It's just the road that it can't meet. And given it will be in the same location, we've never received any complaints about anything injurious to staff's knowledge against the old garage, so there's no reason to think that rebuilding it will suddenly cause complaints. This is not a heavily traveled road. It's a neighborhood drive that moves at slow speeds. And the town council did give a favorable recommendation. They don't feel the structure creates anything injurious in terms of the use of the road or the neighborhood. 2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. So the site is attractive and well maintained. Replacing the existing detached garage with a new one does not appear to adversely affect adjacent values. Normally, given that previous garage was built in 1900 and was older, normally when you put a brand new modern structure in, that actually helps how a neighborhood looks rather than detracting from it. Again, the town council is in favor of the petitioner seeking the variance, and they also seem to feel rebuilding the structure would not have an adverse effect. 3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in practical difficulties in the use of the property. This is probably one of the more clear-cut practical difficulties when we examine these with applicant, in that he lost this due to fire. It's been there since before 1900. This is a very small lot size with a dwelling that's set right in the middle of it. So there really isn't a backyard. And this isn't a big garage that he's replacing either. It's really pretty small. And you can see by looking at the aerials, he could try to turn it all different ways, but unless he's gonna literally put it in his front yard up against the much busier road, there's not really a location, and there's nowhere where he wouldn't need a variance. So given that he already has the concrete pad in this location, and the town's supportive of this up against the right-of-way being rebuilt, it does seem like he's got a practical difficulty, and this is the best way to allow him to have that storage space back without having other adverse effects. So consequently, staff would recommend to approve the variance request to allow the petitioner to build a replacement detached garage at the same setback as the previous garage, with the condition that the surveyor stake must remain in place until the garage is built and the permit has been finalized, so that we can see and be sure that nothing's impinging off the property.
Okay, thank you. Is the petitioner present this evening? Would you like to add anything, sir? Okay. Anybody else in the audience have anything to add? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to board discussion. I think it's pretty straightforward. Obviously, I do think that's the most reasonable option for them, since the concrete pad is already there. They couldn't help the fire, so I think this is, in my opinion, the best option to move forward for them. But
I agree. I'm ready to make a motion to approve. All right, here we go. I make a motion to approve application number CC-2026-0082, docket 09-26-VA, according to the findings of the staff report, which are incorporated in the motion by reference. And I don't see any conditions as
There
such.
is a condition.
Oh, with the condition that the surveyor stake must remain in place until the garage is built and the permit has been finalized to show that they're within the setback.
I will second. Roll call vote when you get a chance, please.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hetzensberger,
Yes.
Chester Backus.
Yes.
All right, you'll be able to get your permits if you just reach out to the office. Cash should be able to help you with that. And likewise, unless you just enjoy our entertainment, you don't have to feel like you have to stick around.
Yep, thank you. All right, move on to our next public hearing of the evening, which is application number CC-2026-00085, docket number 10-26-VA. Can you please take us through that, staff?
I can. This is the application of Christopher and Wendy Gordon. They're requesting a variance to allow the construction of a new accessory structure 5 foot from the edge of the State Road 39 right-of-way instead of the required 50 foot. This property is zoned R1, which is rural residential. It's the district that doesn't typically have sewer, but is more dense in residential development than the agricultural district is. And everything surrounding it is also a rural residential. The site is a 1 acre unplatted lot. It's on the east side of South County Road 0 East West, section 35 of Jackson Township. It's in the middle of the unincorporated town of Antioch, south of Frankfort, and it's mostly surrounded by dwellings with a little bit of farm ground to the west, also in the R1 rural residential zoning district. The site is located on the west side of State Road 39 as well, but there's not an access from the state road. The site's a triangular shaped lot with the existing dwelling on the wider end of the shape between 0 and 39. The dwelling was built in 1910, so it's been there since long before zoning existed. And the existing detached garage was a replacement structure permitted in 2005 under previous ownership of the property and built on the same foundation as the prior garage. The petitioners and current owners wish to build another detached accessory structure for personal storage, specifically for their recreational vehicle, but due to the shape and layout of the lot, they're very limited in terms of where to place it without needing a setback variance or creating a visual clearance issue for them when exiting their property. As a triangular lot with roads on both sides, the lot has 2 front setbacks, one on each road. that take the potential area that would normally be available away versus a lot that only has one front setback. When staff provided the petitioners with the required setbacks, they did some measurements on the property to see what they could make work. But after looking at it, they determined that the plan they've submitted to the BZA is the best option, but it will require them requesting the attached variance. Staff did reach out to NDOT for any recommendations or concerns they might have. NDOT responded that since this property does not access from the state road, they don't have any setback requirements as long as the access remains only off the county road. So they just kind of treat it as a backyard. On the second page, you've got an overlay from Beacon showing zoning, and you can see how that lot is triangular and it just kind of has roads on all sides of it. And then down below, site plan from the petitioners with their measurements, showing how they hope to try to fit this new structure in as close to their other accessory structure as they can. They will be able to meet their setbacks from the county road, but consequently, they're gonna end up too close to the state road. So there's 3 findings that have to exist in order to grant a variance. First, the approval will not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. So the proposed new pole barn, if the request is approved, will be in a location that does not appear to be injurious to public health, safety, or morals. It will be far enough out of view for motorists entering onto State Road 39 from County Road 0 East West so as not to create a visual clearance issue. NDOT is not concerned about its location in terms of it affecting their traffic either. 2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. So this is a well-maintained property. The majority of it is surrounded by rural residential uses with agricultural directly west. The proposed building will be for the petitioner's personal storage and specifically their recreational vehicle. Given the purpose of the structure and the area, the addition of an accessory structure would not seem to affect the adjacent neighborhood in an adverse manner. 3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in practical difficulties in the use of the property. If this request is denied, the petitioners will not be permitted to build the new pole barn in the desired location that they are wanting to and they've determined will be most practical. Given the shape and layout of the petition site, the petitioners will likely be required to come back for another variance for any other location they might move to. There's a 50-foot setback from each road's right-of-way, so that just gets tighter and tighter as you move further north. Since NDOT responded they're not concerned with moving into the 50-foot setback from their right-of-way, there doesn't appear to be any issue created there. If we move the structure north, staff has additional concerns that, while also requiring a different set of variances, we would introduce a problem with visual clearance from what's already kind of a gnarly intersection where you come up and around to turn onto 39. And you can kind of see by looking at their site map that, if you have a 50-foot setback off both roads, that takes 100 foot out of the lot. And they don't have hardly 100 foot from one side to the other north of the house. So when you build a building, there's just not room for all of it. So that's where their practical difficulty stems from. So consequently, staff would recommend to approve the variance request to allow the petitioner to build the new accessory structure at a height not to exceed the existing dwelling, which is what the ordinance says, and no nearer than 5 foot from the State Road 39 right of way. So there'd still be a little bit of a setback there to the property line.
Okay, thank you. Is the petitioner present this evening? Would you like to add anything, sir?
No.
Okay. Is there anybody else in the audience that has any questions or like to add anything? Okay. Moving it to board discussion.
So, if we look at this layout, Liz, and you show the right of way here at 55 feet, but then there's another line drawn at another angle that says 60 feet. And I think that's where you're getting the 5 feet difference. I'm not sure, but that's,
55 is the right of way that I was showing them that they have there, and the 60 is their setback.
I think I see where you're going, though. They have not measured directly off the road, so
correct.
they would actually need to shift their building in a little from where they've drawn it to meet their 5 foot setback, because you have to measure perpendicularly off the center of the road. You can't create your additional setback by measuring at an angle to the road.
Correct. Because you don't have any defined angle,
Yeah.
and that 60
Which-
is meaningless.
We'll scoot it a tiny bit closer to 0, but it still will have the required 50 foot from 0.
Are they-
So yes, if you follow that, it's just the way you drew your drawing, he's right. You've actually drawn it with a 0 setback because you measured, you didn't measure perpendicularly to the road. The way the 55 foot on the right of way, although is drawn, that's how you would then follow with your setback straight in. So you'll actually have to scoot your building just a little bit, but you do have ample room not to end up with a variance need on the other side.
And you're okay with that?
Yes,
And you understand it?
yes.
Okay. All right.
And because this is less than twice its required distance, when they get ready to pull the permit, we'll go out and double check where they place their flags and make sure that meets.
Okay.
All right, so now let's see here.
That's a good catch, though.
Now, so is this also considered a condition with a height not to exceed, or is that just part of the finding?
It's actually a requirement in the ordinance,
So we
but
don't need to-
sometimes, I think probably put it in because they're planning to store an RV, so she just wanted to make it clear this thing just can't have
Okay,
limitless height.
so we don't need to list that as a condition since it's already in the regulations, is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, all right. I'm ready to make a motion to
Okay.
approve it. Okay, here we go, so I'd like to make a motion to approve application number CC-2026-00085, excuse me, docket number 10-26-VA, according to the findings of the staff report, which were incorporated in the motion by reference.
I will second that. Roll call vote when you get a chance, please.
That was Chester and Grant.
Yep.
Okay. It's becoming a theme, so I started thinking maybe I missed something. All right, Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Heffensberger,
Yes.
Chester Bankus.
Yes,
Okay, so you can work with Kat to get your permits pulled.
Thank you, guys. Moving on to our last public hearing of the evening, which is application number CC-2026-00094, docket number 11-26-SE. Can you please take us through that staff report?
I can, so, I'm gonna apologize, I'm not sure which of you is the person, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Naparella, all right, so this is the application of Christy Naparella, and, the location is 6799 North State Road 75. This is a request for a special exception for an accessory apartment in an accessory structure. The property is zoned agriculturally, as is everything surrounding it. The petition site is just barely a hair over an acre. It's located between 600 North and 700 North on the east side of North State Road 75 in Section 3 of Owen Township. The site is also less than a half of a mile southwest of the unincorporated town of Moran. The petitioner and her husband recently purchased the site. It has an existing dwelling and an existing accessory structure on it. The previous owner had started some renovations inside the accessory structure to try to convert it into a dwelling unit, but did not complete them, nor did they obtain special exception approval from this board, nor did they get any appropriate permits for what they were doing. The new owner, to her credit, had called us, as she got in there to be like, hey, is this really legal? And realized that it didn't have approval, so she's trying to follow the process properly before she starts to do any further build out. Staff did a preliminary walkthrough of the accessory structure. We've noted a few residential code issues, but it's not been completed for residential use, so we don't actually have an illegal use here. It just started the work. And we noted to the applicant that if she's permitted to move forward through the boards, that ultimately a certified inspector will need to do that, the walkthrough, and work with them through the permitting process to meet residential building code. Staff's understanding the petitioner and her husband will reside in the primary dwelling, and they hope to have their son live in the accessory apartment once it's legalized and a certificate of occupancy can be issued. On the second page of the map, showing where this property is, kind of where State Road turns, and how close that is to Moran. There's also a picture here where you can see the primary house, and then this is actually a really cute accessory structure back behind. Not at all what we typically see for accessory apartments. Really fancy shed, I think, when it was initially built. I think if I remember correctly, it was originally built as like a personal woodworking shop, and then it kind of morphed. at any rate, we've got our special exception findings that we need to examine in terms of whether or not we can approve an application. First, the proposed use conforms to the district provisions in which it will be located in the general regulations of the ordinance. So accessory structures or accessory apartments do have additional standards. There would only be one on this parcel, so that standard is met. The second one, the accessory structure, it has a total of 720 square foot in it. The primary dwelling has roughly 1,400, so that would appear to be met. The third, this isn't an existing detached structure, not a mobile or manufactured home. So that would appear to be met. It is a permanent structure, not a temporary structure. It does have a foundation. For the owner must reside in the dwelling or the accessory apartment. The owner does reside in the dwelling now and intends to continue to reside there. So that standard would appear to be met. 5, there can be no exterior staircases. In this case, there would be none. There is a second story. They hope to put a loft sleeping quarters in, but there wouldn't be any exterior access. 6 does not apply in this case because that is relevant to apartments that are inside the primary dwelling unit. 7 requires that building code and health department standards be met. So as far as building code is concerned, the applicant does intend to meet code and work with us to figure out what has to be done there. We didn't see anything that would be impossible to meet in terms of working through that process. In terms of the health department, the petitioner has been working through the process, trying to get a soil sample to the health department. Some information did come through, actually I think this morning on this case. Long story short, right now I think we've discovered there's not any septic hooked to this now. There's some other questions and concerns about how that install is gonna go. The petitioner is in the process of trying to figure out what their options are. They may have to, I think Kat said, move a fence and work some logistics out. They don't yet have approval from the health department that something can work here. So this is something that's still a little bit outstanding. The 8th item is that parking be required in off-street space, so there's no concerns there. There's plenty of room for the 2 spaces for the dwelling and 2 for the apartment. The second finding is that the use not involve an element or cause a condition that may be dangerous, injurious, or noxious to any other property or persons and shall comply with the performance standards herein. So if the application is approved, there wouldn't seem to be a concern about anything injurious as long as we can get a septic plan together. This building itself has been here this way for a very long time and no complaints have ever been received about it being noxious in any way. In fact, looking at the picture, it actually looks really cute, so I'm not surprised nobody's ever said anything about it. C, the proposed use shall be sited oriented in landscape so its relationship of buildings and grounds to adjacent buildings and properties do not impair health, safety, or comfort, nor adversely affect values of adjacent properties. So again, this is on roughly an acre, and there's an existing structure that would house the accessory apartment that looks kind of like a small cottage back behind the primary dwelling. For those who are on State Road 75, it's likely they're not going to readily see this at all, just because it's right at a curve. So usually when traffic is on a curve, motorists are more looking at the changing traffic direction than they are looking at what's around them, at least if their turn is going to go well for them. So this finding would appear to be met as long as the standards are followed in the ordinance. 4, that the use provide a total environmental effect consistent with and not harmful to the neighborhood. So the structure in question has been sitting here for 20 years. No complaints have ever been received. There's woodland surrounding this. The standard would seem to be met. 5, again, like the standard for accessory apartments, making sure we have vehicular access and parking organized so we don't have conflicting traffic movement on nearby streets. And there's no concerns there. There's room for 4 spaces and turning around. And finally, the proposed use shall promote the objectives of the ordinance and be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So the 2012 Comprehensive Plan Land Use Goal 2 says to promote the development of residential areas with high-quality housing in a variety of types, styles, and densities. The use of accessory apartments, subject to board approval where appropriate, supports this goal. And this also provides an additional housing unit without moving further farm ground for production, or in this case, cutting down any additional woodland because the structure already exists. So it is consistent with the comprehensive plan's goal of minimizing the effects of housing on agriculture in the ag zoning district. If we had the health department issue worked out, staff would be supportive of approving this, and the applicant is well aware that this all kind of came in today. So given that we still have some septic questions with the existing house and the accessory apartment, and we don't have a plan the health department's sure will work yet, staff would recommend continuing this application to give the applicant and the health department and their installer a chance to see if they can come up with a plan that will allow them to meet the remaining findings for approval. Obviously, if they can't come up with a plan, then we'll have to talk through that, but given they just kind of got those reports back this morning, there just hasn't been time. So that would be staff's recommendation, is to just continue this to the April meeting and then pick up that conversation. Of course, if anybody in the audience has comments or questions, you might want to, get those in case that's relevant to what you want to ask them to bring back.
Nope, that sounds good. Do you guys have anything, any questions?
Yes.
Would you mind coming to the mic, please?
First of all, I'm Dawn McMains. I live adjacent to their property. It was formerly my parents' property, so I'm very familiar with the structure. I guess one question I would have, and this is just more of a general question of the rules with the variance for an accessory dwelling, is what are the renting rules for that?
Yeah, so accessory apartments are not restricted, other than the owner has to live in one or the other. So they're not like a medical dependency where a single wide trailer is brought in temporarily to house somebody who's sick, and then you pull that back out again. So both units cannot be rented, but one unit or the other can be, and the reason the owner has to live on the property is because then that forces the owner to live with whatever they might put in that rental unit. But similarly to where a household size can be a family of up to 8, and we don't go in and like card people and require birth certificates as long as they're within the required numbers. We also, on an accessory apartment, don't try to like stake it out and collect identification as long as it's just being used as a single family dwelling. They can't rent out individual rooms or anything like that. That would change the zoning category completely. But there's not a restriction that says they cannot rent one or the other, but they have to physically live in the other one, or else the approval would be void, and the second unit couldn't be used.
Okay, so obviously I'm not concerned because I met their son and stuff, so for their current use, but I would be concerned if it was sold or if they rented to someone else outside of their family member. So is there any clause that can be placed in there in such a manner that,
I mean, the challenge
They-
for me as
'cause it's
staff,
probably as close to my
Yeah.
house as it is theirs almost
yeah.
in property.
I mean, I think the board can try to put, they can put whatever clause they want on. The problem for me as staff is the enforceability of that. Like, if you decided you were gonna move out of your house and you were gonna rent it to somebody, you would have the right to do that.
Right.
If, somebody came in and was like, hey, we want a clause, it's like, we literally would have to have a staff member staked out there and then trying to figure out, okay, is this a son? Is it a daughter? Is it a relative? Are they paying money? Are they not paying money? It's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to enforce. Now, we can figure out if something's a party house, if there's a whole bunch of people coming and going like a crazy turntable, but trying to sort out that, my recommendation would be that if the board feels that this is not an appropriate location for an accessory apartment for a single family unit, that it should be denied rather than trying to figure out if the person is related to such and such, then it's okay, but if it's not, then it's not okay, and now we have to take birth certificates and try to figure that out, because those conditions would apply to the next owner as well, so we're now tracking that for all time. Same as like with a house, where we often say, we shouldn't approve or deny a house based on, the identity of the person living in it. We should be looking at whether or not the house is appropriate there, because land use is long-term. You're not gonna live forever. She's not gonna live forever.
Right.
Not wishing your deaths upon you. I'm not gonna live forever. Well, point the finger back at me.
One guaranteed
But
thing is we're gonna
structures
die.
can be there for hundreds of years. So if it seems like it's a bad location for somebody to live, then that's where the topic should center around. But again, that's staff opinion. The board certainly has the right to do whatever, and staff has to try to do their best to enforce that and take it to a judge if there's a violation. But historically, when we get down to trying to figure out who's adopted, who's not, who has a birth certificate, who doesn't, and then you get into protective laws about who people are, that can be very, very difficult to enforce and can sometimes just create a whole bunch of conflict. Now, if the concern is you don't want to see people over there, and you'd like some kind of shrubs planted, or a visual barrier so that you don't have to see a car parked or whatever, like that's a much more practical condition to go, okay, we can see if that's met or not, sign off on it and maintain it. That doesn't require us to figure out who's who. If it's about a problem where you feel like if there was a family renting that their car coming in and out is going to obstruct your visibility, whereas her son doesn't have a car, or something like that. And I'm just throwing that out there.
Right.
as staff, it's a much more reasonable thing to say, okay, these houses are close together, maybe we need to add a buffer of some sort. We've done that before in situations where there's concerns, not saying that's what your concern is, but saying like it should be about the physical characteristics of how these things affect each other, not about the specific birthright of the person who happens to live there.
Okay.
And now I do think that it would not be allowed under our zoning ordinance to be used as a, like a vacation rental or a short-term rental. It
So-
would not be.
The ordinance is actually silent on that. We treat single-family dwellings as single-family dwellings. So where that comes in is if somebody's trying to rent and groups of people are coming and they're not related and they're not a family, yeah, but if somebody does it as a month-to-month rental and the person staying there is an entire family unit, the
No.
zoning ordinance doesn't say that they can't rent it on a shorter term than a yearly lease. So it,
Yeah.
but
That
if
is a big
somebody's
concern.
inviting people in and they're like, okay, you know, me and 6 of my friends have rented this house and we're coming in, we're not a family, we don't live together. Yeah, the ordinance would then look at that as a boarding house or a rooming house, not a, you know, not a single-family dwelling.
And I.
And that's
and
true
I-
of your house as well. If you
And-
wanted to rent it month to month as somebody, our ordinance wouldn't prevent that.
I'm talking about, we can, those rentals, I don't think, I think that our ordinance would not
So
allow
we-
that as a, because that's not being used for residential purposes.
So
And-
we've examined this issue before. Nowhere in our ordinance does it tie single-family dwelling to a length of time. In fact, there's a lot of people who rent on a week-to-week rental because it's easier to evict a long-term rental if they don't pay. And our ordinance doesn't make that illegal either. It just says, it defines single-family. So it defines a family as a group of people that live together regularly, and are, you know, of a certain size or less, and that definition holds true irregardless of what the single-family dwelling is.
So,
We haven't had a problem with that so far. You know, I know over in Lafayette, they have additional rules that talk about terms of length of stays because of the college and the amount of people. Out here, there's not the same demand. It hasn't been something that's been an issue, but the current ordinance, we haven't had a dispute where we've had to sort it out, but I've never found anything that ties single-family dwelling to the amount of time somebody owns it or rents it, simply that it has to be a single family.
so to clarify, it would be okay to have it like an Airbnb for a family, but if it was an Airbnb for a party group, it would not be allowed.
Yes, and that can be a little fun to enforce because we have run into that question before. And I would note, there's a lot of Airbnb houses, I actually own one, that is a medium and long-term rental. But that is the venue in which it's placed to try to find a tenant. And then they sign a lease, same as you would if you advertised anywhere else and found a tenant. And, you know, and then they're there 11 months, 15 months, 18 months, you know, whatever the case. So Airbnb doesn't always mean swap out. It's kind of like saying Kleenex. Like, it doesn't always mean it's Kleenex brand. Airbnb has kind of become a very confusing and nebulous term because it was originally a vacation rental, but it's now used just as a method of advertising rentals, some of which are vacation rentals, some of which are medium or long-term rentals, but because the platform doesn't charge the landlord for placing it there, sometimes you see them there instead of somebody paying to put it on a different site and spending several hundred a year, and then they'll just cancel it once it's rented and throw it back up. Zillow is that way too. People will sometimes put rentals on there of either type. So I think the ordinance doesn't care where you advertise it. The ordinance cares about who's actually in it. And if it's not a single-family unit, then irregardless of how they got there, it's gonna be a problem.
Do you have any other questions, ma'am?
Yes. So I guess in regards to that, is there any way to put a clause around that? Because, I mean, obviously that's not their intended use. I'm
Yeah.
looking more down the
Yeah.
road, so it's not against them personally. So I don't want to
Yeah.
make it look, it's just
I
like
understand.
looking at it from
Yeah.
a long-term perspective. Is there any clause to protect against that turning into that use?
So again, I'm just gonna speak as staff. The board ultimately will have to discuss their perspective. I would again not want to try to make a clause around who somebody is. However, I do think the board could, and staff wouldn't think it would be impossible to check. You know, they could say that if it's being rented, regardless of what somebody is paying or whether her son's paying her or staying for free or she's renting it to someone unrelated,
Right.
that lease has to be at least a certain minimum amount of time, whether that be a month or 6 months or a year. Now, the challenge is sometimes even on 1-year leases, people default and move out. So do you want to make the person have it vacant? But I certainly think you could get
No,
to
you
a
wouldn't
reasonable
have to.
time that's over a few days that would knock out like somebody coming in and out more quickly.
Right.
As, from a zoning perspective, that's not overly difficult to verify, because cars are gonna come and go, so, you know, if it's with a different group every 4 or 5 days, you're gonna obviously see different vehicles coming in and out, and, if somebody's there permanently, they're gonna have some kind of lease to be able to show that they're on a, you know, if there was a dispute, we needed to figure it out, so I don't think staff would think that would be unenforceable if the board wanted to put a minimum length of rental on a family unit being able to stay there.
Yeah.
I guess that would be a request that I would make, is
And
that there
you
be
could do
some.
that as a condition of the approval.
Well, but since we're gonna move it or push it back to the next meeting, obviously you're not even.
No,
doing-
I probably would just revise it in the staff report if you think you want to put that so it's listed to make your motion easy.
Apologize.
Okay,
Okay, so that would be a request. And then the other thing is that where does the staff consider the 4 parking spaces? Because that's,
I can
So-
sit in our driveway.
yeah, so that can be
We don't
anywhere.
plan on using, that one area, because it's not ours.
right,
So the ordinance says they cannot be on the street. They can add gravel or put in their driveway anywhere else they like, as long as they don't get over their impervious surface restrictions for how much ground can be covered. We do not count parking spaces. Aw. Phones are tricky. Sometimes mine doesn't react even when I do shut it off properly. So we don't typically count inside garage spaces as the 2 required spaces, simply because people don't always use their garages for parking. So again, we look at the actual property, not necessarily the individual use of the person. But property with 1 acre of ground generally has, a car takes 8 foot of width, and if it's a full-size truck, maybe 20 foot of length. So you need a total of roughly a 20 foot by 100 foot space for 4 parking spaces. A 1 acre lot, I've never seen one that you can't fit that on. I'm not
Okay.
saying if somebody didn't have a bunch of floodplain or something, there might not be an exception.
I just didn't know if it restricted it to like a certain distance, because the parking is not close to, nor is there a pathway necessarily right now to get there. And I don't know if you're planning on, doing that or anything, but there's not, only access would be via our, lane that we have to get access to our property that we have an easement for directly behind that
So you have an
property.
easement across them through the it's a shared drive, is what you're saying?
It's not a shared drive.
It's theirs.
It's our drive.
And they
but
have an
There's
easement.
2 buildings. There's the building that's in, that they're wanting to make the apartment that was originally intended for a wood shop, not a apartment building. Or my dad would have probably never built it, to be quite honest. But between those 2, the building that my mom actually owns and the building that they're looking at, there is an easement just in that space between those 2 buildings, so that either one of us can have access to the
So-
entrance to those 2 buildings.
It looks like they have a drive directly off 75. Am I seeing that wrong?
No,
Their
we do
drive
have a
is.
driveway
Right, but the closest access point to that building
to
is,
that building.
So would something prevent you from extending a drive back there if you wanted to? The ordinance doesn't require you to put the parking up against it, but obviously if you don't have an easement, you can't use somebody else's ground.
If we wanted to use part of our yard, we could probably put gravel back to it. But
So,
my son just parks in our garage.
yeah, and the ordinance doesn't prohibit that,
He's
you know,
very
you.
picky about where his car's at, so.
yeah, and like I said, most of these questions are not reflective
You're
on,
worried about that.
I'm worried about the next person or,
So, I mean, there's gonna be a question, if there is a legal recorded easement that says that this property has the right to use your driveway, this board can't take that away, whether it's a wood shop or whether it's something else.
Right.
If you have previously conveyed a recorded easement that's
right,
on record in the recorder's office,
Right.
we can't say that they can or can't use it. Now, if there's not a recorded easement, there's just some kind of informal agreement.
it's recorded.
Okay, so if it's recorded, whatever it says is what's
Okay.
gonna be true no matter what this board does or doesn't approve relative to this. Like, that's not something this
Right.
board can change. Probably you should have removed the easement before it was sold if you were gonna exit it from the family and you didn't wanna convey it to future
Well, no,
owners.
we put the easement in because of it being sold.
Okay, so yeah, this board can't change an easement.
Okay.
Whatever that easement says is what it says.
Okay,
Now, we did not include the easement in where, I mean, we believe they have enough space for parking on the 1 acre. But if the
Yeah.
easement says that they have the right to drive that to get to the property from another
not
direction.
drive on it, but just access from their own property.
Yeah, so
in
we can't
between, so-
remove that. Whatever
Okay.
rights they have are gonna exist
Okay.
regardless. That,
Yeah,
yeah,
it
you
would
would have
be-
had to have
it would be
specified
challenging.
that.
You could put, I mean, my dad looked at
Yeah, we
that.
don't want to.
It's not like really it wouldn't be an ideal driveway situation.
Yeah.
And then I think you covered my concerns in regards that it wasn't built for the intended use. So that it
And
would
we see
probably-
that all the time. It's just, it has to meet residential code,
Right.
including fire codes and other things. We've been through it. It did, we have some records of, of the building in the past.
Mm-hmm.
We don't believe there's anything on this that would prevent it from meeting residential
Okay.
code, but they do have to
There
put in
is-
proper insulation. They do have to
Right.
put in proper smoke detection and fire codes. They're gonna have to address anything in framing that they have to in order to meet their other codes.
Okay.
So
Because there
no, they
is
can't just
access
camp in
to
it.
the top floor that's a large door.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just be concerned more from a safety, and I don't want to end up with any liability that they would fall out into our, fall
Yeah.
out and roll into our
So I guess first
easement
off,
or
if
something.
you don't own it, then you're not gonna be liable if something happens there. But,
It's just so
building,
close to our property, that's
Yeah.
why.
so are you saying there's actually an exterior access
There's
that's doors that's out with no deck?
Correct.
So building code won't allow that. They're either gonna have to place a deck or they're gonna have to remove the doors, one or the other. They're
Okay.
not, and the deck can't impinge on your property. So it can't cross the property line. So code, not just on this, but on any residence, you can't have a second story door that just opens to nothing. That's
Right.
building code, and the state isn't gonna issue a variance from that because someone could die, whether or
Right,
not it's your
okay.
liability. So yeah, that's gonna have to be addressed as part of their permitting
Okay,
process, either to get rid of it or to put a properly constructed, structurally sound deck
Okay.
outside of it that has appropriate height of railings.
okay. And then my last concern was the septic, which I believe you're addressing, but it would
Yes.
be the fact that I believe it was connected somehow, some
Yeah,
way.
they connect.
They connected it to the existing septic system without proper permits. The people
Correct,
that
and-
owned it prior to,
Yeah.
and that septic system already is an old septic system that dumps directly into the waterway.
So that's the reason for the request for a continuance is
Okay.
that has come up as they've
Yeah, our
tried to figure out what's
intent,
there.
If we can fit it, is we wanna put a whole new system in.
Yeah,
That'll
that'll be
be a
tight
4-bedroom, but it'll be tight, but we're gonna, they're trying,
to figure that out.
yeah, Matt and Nash have been talking, so.
So for people online, the applicant is just saying they're working on figuring that out.
Okay.
And yeah, as staff, I'm not gonna recommend the board approve an accessory apartment that does not have a septic plan the health department believes will work. So we
Okay.
don't know at this point they can't make it work, but they don't have a plan that will work either, which is why staff is recommending we continue a month and let them meet and work with the health department. Now that we know, as you referred to, found out this morning that there's some issues there,
Okay,
to give them a fair chance to try to address those,
Right.
rather than making them reapply,
okay.
so.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I think out of all of those, thank you for answering my questions. I really appreciate it because I didn't know how all the code worked. I tried to look it up last night, but I couldn't find it online. I just would request that the board consider adding some clause there for a minimum leasing period to eliminate the ability for just people to come and go on a very frequent basis.
Do you, as the applicant, have any issue or objection to that in concept?
No, cause
Okay.
we have, as long as we live there, it'll be my son, if my son decides to move out, then it'll just be used for if family comes to visit
Sure.
or something. It's not ever gonna be, my husband has no desire to be a rental person.
Yeah, and that's
So-
why I said, I don't, it's not against them by any means, because I understand
Yeah.
what their purpose is.
So
It's
staff
just
can draft
protecting
something
us
to
from-
add to the staff report before the next meeting in terms of, if there's no objection from the applicant, in terms of a commitment that would try to put some guardrails on that. And we'll make sure you have a copy of that before the next meeting. as well. And if you catch your email, we'd be happy to also copy you on it so you know what staff's recommending before the
Okay.
April meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have anything to add, Scott?
I have no questions,
Okay.
just comments, I guess. My feeling in general is that unless there's some significant reason to continue, I don't know why we would do that. Our granting the special exception, Liz, in my opinion, is not a get-out-of-jail-free card to violate building codes or health and
No, so
Health
here's,
codes.
here's the reason why we don't approve subject to with health department. Our boards used to. Special exceptions run with the land forever. They never expire. So if it turns out that the site is not suitable and that the action can't happen, then what we've had happen historically is realtors who perhaps are not most motivated by transparency will take lots with these approvals and they'll sell them as fully approved and available, and a buyer will buy them, believing the realtor, and then they'll come to our office wanting their permits, only to discover that it was approved subject to and that it's actually impossible to do. We've had whole house sites in floodplains in the past approved that way, that then it just didn't work out. So our policy has been for the last about 20 years that if there is something that's in play, that if it doesn't work would mean it simply can't happen, then we don't want to create the appearance of legality in the market that then rides forever with no expiration with that property. When had we waited a moment, we would have realized it was completely impossible and we should have denied it so somebody couldn't represent it as being possible when it's actually not. So if it was something like we wanted to put in a driveway, yeah, staff would be like, sure, approve it subject to, let it work out in the details. But a septic on a lot with no sewer or water from a utility, that's a make or break. If they can't get a septic there, similar to like a floodplain situation, then there is no way to put the accessory apartment in. And so approving it and then allowing, maybe she wouldn't do it, but at some point, people who buy and sell would then say, oh yeah, this is approved for a second unit, and we'd like an extra however much money for it. It creates a situation then where it puts staff in the position of being the bad guy, and then buyers end up really angry because it's been misrepresented, and often they have little or no recourse back against it. So we just have moved away from making those approvals and pushing that off down the road to be figured out if we think there's something that could be a complete showstopper. Does that at least explain why the logic is? Not at all. I mean, you may still feel like it doesn't matter, but I guess just trying to explain why we do it, like why we recommend it that way as a continuance versus, yes, it used to be, 20 years ago that in this situation, we would just say, yep, approved subject to, and we just had some nightmares that in some cases plagued us for decades before we were able to get them sorted out.
So I believe, can't we also add a, tack on the fact that she has to only use it for family?
So you could, but as staff, that is very, very difficult to prove. I can't require somebody to give me a birth certificate. I can't make them, so it comes down to a he said, she said. Our ordinance used to actually say with respect to approving houses, that if somebody was a family member, we would approve it more easily. We took that out of the ordinance because we can't legally demand whether someone's adopted, whether they're related by blood. And we sort of questioned, is it actually good planning at all to make a decision based on someone's blood versus on whether or not it actually fits in the area, because it might not. We had a lot of cases where we built houses under that and it was the family member. 5 years later, they sold it and someone unrelated was sitting there. And it was like, well, if that was a bad spot to put a house, now it follows us. So you could,
I'm
but
just saying, because if she's
staff-
got
yeah.
concerns, right?
yeah.
You may not be able to demand a birth certificate, but a court can.
So, but we have to
So-
take it to court and then try to get the judge to make that order. And we're gonna have to show the
Well,
judge
do we
we have
even have to
reason to
do that?
believe they're not family. Yeah, we are
Couldn't
bound to.
they take it to court?
No, we have to enforce the violation of our ordinance if they complain that it's violated.
Okay.
Has to come out of our legal funding and be our push through the courts. Now, they could come against us in court for not enforcing it, but they can't enforce our condition for us. That's our job. So, yeah, if you do have the right to make it as a condition, but if you make it as a condition and we have to enforce it, then we have to try to take it to court and try to build a case and try to convince the judge we have reason to believe it's not family based on something we have.
I'm just trying to protect from this scenario.
I think the way to handle it is a prohibition on short-term.
I think that's a much better approach to approach what are the.
Because that's
Yeah.
the problem. that we're seeing a lot of places.
And if you
With-
say, if you ignore family, but you say you can't take money, well, now what happens if they have a family situation where the son has to pay her? Some families do have arrangements where children don't have a free ride. Now they're in violation, so I would agree with Jay, the better way to approach it is decide what timeline of rental is reasonably avoids some sort of fast turnover like we would picture a vacation rental and locks us into whether it's the son or someone else being permanent. I will say, of all of our accessory apartments in the county, in my 20 years, I have never had a single one generate a complaint because of the way it's being rented, because the owner of the property has to live there. So whatever they're doing, they have to be okay with first. Now, we have had situations where they've sold and a buyer has tried to like backdoor it into a duplex, and we've had to cite it and be like, nope, that's not the approval. If you're not gonna live there, you only have one unit. We have had some of those. But I can't think of a single case where an owner under this approval who's living there has then attempted to use the other unit in a way that's obnoxious to themselves and neighbors. At least we've never gotten a complaint on it. The only ones we've dealt with have been cases where, you know, things have bought and sold and the new buyer hasn't researched the required standards and they've thought they were getting a duplex when in reality they were not. They cannot rent both units. They have to live in one, and they've had to either vacate one and abandon it or resell it appropriately, or in some cases, they've come back to the boards and worked with neighbors and actually tried to approve it as two separate units if it's big enough. I can think of a case where it was family originally, still is family, but they needed to separate out mortgages, and they ended up later coming back and subdividing it into multiple acre lots. Usually with small units like this, they're not big enough. You need 850 square foot to be a independent standalone dwelling. So in this case, they couldn't just split it off, and you need 1 acre of ground per dwelling for an independent house. So this one wouldn't have that option. But we have seen some, like that one I'm thinking of had like 20 acres with 2 houses on it. We actually made them separate them when they put them in case they ever got subdivided in the future, and that went that way. But the others, I understand the concern, but, you know, not at all negating it. But practically speaking, we haven't had a rash of owners that are like, yeah, I live here, but I'm gonna put a party in my accessory apartment that's sitting 20 foot from my back door. That just hasn't been a,
Do we need to make a motion to table this till next month?
you need to if that's what you're
Okay.
gonna do, or if you're
Continue
gonna
it.
do something
That's
with
what I
it.
meant.
Continue.
Yeah.
I'd like to have one other thought here. I like what you said about when the owner has to live there, that you've never had a problem with any other auxiliary structure, accessory structure being rented. I think that provides enough safeguard alone right there.
That's the reason the owner requirement's in there.
If another requirement is pushed on her beyond that, I would think that that would also be something that the person that is next door neighbor is saying she'd like to see those requirements, that she'd be willing to put those same requirements on her property, because who knows how would you protect this lady that has the rental unit on her property if somebody else moved in. Now, I think what we have is good enough, and I'll just put that on the record. But maybe I don't understand it. I'd like to hear.
No,
what
I
Jay says.
think you're a fair point that what's good for the goose is good for the gander,
Yeah,
but we
that's right.
can't apply a commitment to someone who's not applying. So in this,
Yeah.
unless she
Okay.
comes with a, you know, her house burns down and she wants to rebuild it or something like that, put that on her, other than to make the comment that
Well, she's
it
not.
should be fair.
Well,
Okay, well, I'm ready
Yes,
to take and go from conversation to a motion.
I agree.
Okay, so I'm gonna make a motion to continue application CC 2026 for docket 11-26 SE, according to the findings of the staff report, which are incorporated in the motion.
You don't
You
need
don't have to-
findings in this case. You're not
Okay.
making an approval or denial.
All right,
I'll second
good.
that.
We're gonna continue it.
All right, so Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hetzensberger,
Yes.
and Chester Bacon.
Yes.
Yep, so continue to the next meeting, which is April
28th.
28th. So there won't be new mail notice going out, you're getting notice now. It'll be here in this same room at 6 PM. Did you put your phone number on the sign-in sheet? If you could make sure you do that, because if there's any change or interruption, or we don't have a quorum, anything unexpected happens, Kat will personally call you to make sure you also know what's changed and you don't, show up unnecessarily. We don't anticipate a change, but sometimes stuff happens, so.
Okay.
Yes, there's a podium out in the hallway there, outside the door, so you can make sure you sign your name and phone number and email address. Okay, thank you.
Any new business?
I don't think so. I think we're businessed out.
Yes. Okay, so like they said, our next meeting is April 28th, 2026. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second.
Somebody other than Chester and Grant.
I'm not gonna sleep anyway.
Jay, what kind of